Alphaville by Jean-Luc Godard. This movie is set in a noirish city of modernist buildings and electric lighting, creating an extremely stifling dystopic atmosphere. For it is a dystopia. The city of Alphaville is ruled by the computer called Alpha 60, essentially an AI that has been given too much power that it started exploiting it. This is easily one of the most important movies for us today, with our over-obsession with AI and with the rise of techno-fascism. Alphaville was also likely the direct influence on such cult films as Blade Runner or Space Odyssey. And like with most films that touch upon the topic of artificial intelligence, the actual question it asks is, what makes us human? Is there anything that actually makes us different from the machine? And it does try to figure out an answer. What makes us human is irrationality, chaos, and unwillingness to follow the laws of logic. Godard seems to be saying that the only way to defeat the machine is to think outside its categories. But then between the lines, he's also expressing a doubt about how long that victory can last, which is definitely a question that is as important for us as ever. Werkmeister Harmonies by Bela Tarr. This film tells us about the life of a small town in communist Hungary. Tarr tries to show us what happens to people in a time of despair, how they try to find something to hold on to, but how that something eventually brings nothing but misery to those people. For Tarr, there is an essential flaw in the world, in this film represented by the imperfect musical scale that has dominated Western music for centuries. But any attempts at changing that imperfection lead to resistance and violence by the very people who suffer from it. One of the most striking images of that imperfection is a traveling circus that exhibits an actual whale from the ocean. The characters of the film try to cling to the whale, seeing him as a god figure, not willing to realize that the whale has long been dead and there is no way the whale can console them in their suffering. Tarr shows us how this clinging to an object that cannot fulfill your desire slowly but steadily leads you to a path of destruction. Three Crowns of the Sailor by Raúl Ruiz. On the surface, this film by Raúl Ruiz is about a journey. In it, a man tells a story about his travels aboard a cargo ship. He goes from Chile to Colombia, from Singapore to Morocco, from Mexico to Senegal. But you shouldn't really trust it. In fact, the man who told the main character about the ship also told him not to believe anything he says. But that doesn't bother the main character. He still boards the ship and embarks on his journey. What is it that the man in the bar was warning him about? Is there something wrong with the ship, or with the crew, or with reality itself? Those are the kinds of questions Raúl Ruiz is posing to us, but he is very unwilling to answer those questions. Piece by piece we have to assemble this labyrinthine film to make sense of it and understand what he's trying to tell. But the result definitely justifies the means, and what we get is one of the most beautiful films about the nature of reality in the face of death. The Asthenic Syndrome by Kira Muratova. This is a film about broken people. About people who have no more energy to pursue philosophical discussions. After all, they live in the Soviet Union. They would often stare in one direction without a single thought in their heads, or lie down right in the metro station just because, why not? The Asthenic Syndrome is a film that I felt a bit reluctant about including on this list, since it's not so much philosophical as anti-philosophical. It is very skeptical about our ability to philosophize and communicate and simply make the world a better place. But in that I also see one kind of philosophical expression. Being skeptical about something is, after all, a cornerstone of philosophy itself, and Kira Muratova is one of the best filmmakers who have found how to express that skepticism in cinema. The Conversation by Francis Ford Coppola. The Conversation is a movie that is easy to overlook among other masterpieces by Coppola. However, it is one of his deepest films, touching upon the influence of technology on our lives and questioning the objectivity of film as a medium. The movie is about a man, Harry, an expert in surveillance, who is tasked with taping the conversation of two people in the middle of a crowd. As Harry decodes and edits their conversation, he starts to suspect something's not right, that what he's doing may eventually bring suffering to those two people. In addition, he's afraid, and rightly so, that he may also be under surveillance by the guy who gave him this job. A logical consequence is that we as viewers of the film also start to feel uncomfortable from this endless chain of surveillance, reminding us so much of Orwell's 1984, where the key to creating a surveillance state is to make people believe they're constantly being surveilled. And in our totally digitalized society, that problem is more relevant than ever, making The Conversation a film that should definitely be on your watch list. It's Such a Beautiful Day by Don Hertzfeldt. This film is about Bill. Bill is filled with all kinds of existential horrors that have been haunting his life for years. As if that weren't enough, Bill has another problem. He's a stickman, of the kind you would draw on the margins of your notebook as a kid. Bill might be having a hard time living as a stickman, but for us that is great, because we aren't getting distracted by any of the contingencies of human beings. We see the human being in its absolute ideal form, the form of a stickman. As a stickman, Bill helps us understand a thing or two about our own lives, about the nature of mental illnesses, memory or perception, and does that in a form that would actually make you feel compassion for the little man, as if he weren't a stickman but a normal human being made of flesh and bone. Or rather because he is a stickman and not a human being made of flesh and bone. That's for you to decide. Either way, it's such a beautiful day, makes an incredibly insightful watch. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead by Tom Stoppard. This film builds on top of Shakespeare's Hamlet, which is already a philosophical masterpiece, but expands it with many more reflections and thought-provoking ideas. It tells us about the lives of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, who are, as we know from the title, dead. Or not exactly dead, but not alive either. Their lives are in a sort of intermediary state between life and death, which creates all sorts of philosophical paradoxes. My favorite episode is the one where one of them flips a coin, but no matter how many times he flips it, it always comes up heads. This makes us wonder, is there something wrong with reality itself? And why do the characters feel so uncomfortable about the probabilities not working properly? In this film, Tom Stoppard seems to be saying that what constitutes order is essentially chaos itself, as well as randomness. The absence of randomness here is represented as a limbo, the limbo where Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. Blow Up by Michelangelo Antonioni. One day the photographer Thomas secretly takes a few pictures of a random couple he sees in a park. When he comes back home and prints those pictures, he starts noticing something weird in them. In the background he finds a vague face of a man holding a gun, and then in another photo he finds another man apparently just recently shot dead. Or does he? In this film, Antonioni explores our obsession with creating patterns and meaning out of the chaotic mass of sensorial experiences. He makes us reflect how much of what we think objectively exists in the world is actually nothing but figments of our own imagination. Even the photograph, which was believed to be something that can capture reality in its exact form, is put into question here. We understand that absolutely nothing can escape human interpretation, that the object cannot exist outside the subject that perceives it, and that makes Blow Up a magnificent statement on the nature of reality around us. Waking Life by Richard Linklater. Waking Life is probably the most explicitly philosophical movie on this list. It is essentially a collection of random conversations the main character has with random people inside his dreams. They reflect on the questions of existence, progress, free will, rationality, irrationality, and many more things that are quite essential to philosophy in general. This movie is also quite special in that it feels more like a conversation you might have after 3 cups of beer with a good friend rather than a philosophical treatise, and combined with a very striking visual style, this movie becomes a very memorable experience that I definitely recommend checking out. The Pervert's Guide to Ideology by Sophie Fiennes and Slavoj Žižek. This last movie on my list is really a bit out of place here, since it's more like a collection of video essays and reflections on other films by Slavoj Žižek. Here Žižek manages to dissect a lot of ideological issues that exist in our society by analyzing such films as Taxi Driver, Full Metal Jacket, The Dark Knight, Brazil, and many others. In The Perfect Guide to Ideology, Žižek reminds us that cinema is one of the most powerful tools we have for understanding how the world shapes our desires, and that idea echoes through all the films on his list. Each of them tries to make us question what we take for granted in our everyday lives, and paired with Žižek's unforgettable style and humor, his commentary creates a particularly engaging experience that will keep you thinking for days.
Or start eating that trash can.
I already am eating from the trash can all the time. The name of this trash can is ideology.